Go ahead and call this briefing meeting for the Board of Water Resources to order. Today is March 20th, 2024, just a little bit after 1:30, and we are in St. George at the Conference Center, just wrapping up the Excellent Water Users Conference. So we'll just go ahead and jump in for the record, get introductions. I'm Juliette Tennert, chairing the board this year, representing Salt Lake and Tooele. I will note that Spencer Jones is excused, and our other board member who is not seated right now is Brian Steed. We understand that he is trying to join remotely, but we'll excuse him until that time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Davis, Provo River Drainage.
Kyle Stevens, Weber River. Charles Holmgren, Bear River Basin.
Dana Van Horn, Colorado.
Blaine Ibsen, Severe River.
Randy Crozier, Green River District.
All right, thank you. And I'll ask Director Hassenjaeger to introduce those that are here with the Division of Water Resources.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Candace Hassenjaeger from Water Resources, and with our staff today includes Joel Williams, Shalane DiBernardi, Marisa Egbert, Ben Merritt, Carly Payne, Randy Staker, Shannon Klaus taking minutes. Thank you, Shannon, and Marty Bushman. And we have our awesome AV team, Paul Gedge and Carmen McDonald. And then online, we have some staff, Bradley Caldwell, Tom Cox, and Ethan Stainer. So thanks for all those who are attending. We also have some folks from the public at our briefing meeting, Todd Schultz, Wayne Windsor, Rick Smith, and Rodney Banks, and online, Annalee Munsey.
Thank you very much. We'll just go ahead and jump right into the meeting. I know that for many of those here, it's been, an intense couple of days with all the excellent sessions. And so probably just good to just jump on in. Looks like we'll start the meeting with the approval of minutes. Is there anything that we need to note right now? It sounds like everyone's gone through. Looks good. All right. Charles, do you want to make the motion for the approval then?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Right.
I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. And then we'll hear the snow report from Jordan Clayton, and then let's go through the projects. Let's see. First one is RE 480. That's West Cache Irrigation Company. I understand that Marisa is going to be briefing us on that. Charles, I think this one's in your area. Is there anything you want to set up for us as Marisa's?
Well,
share?
just it's kind of a fascinating tragedy, I guess, as tragedies go. I don't know how many videos and photographs Marisa sent the whole rest of the board, but man, I've seen some amazing, sad-looking soil movement up in actually in Franklin County, Idaho, which is part of West Cache Canal Company's conduit from the Bear River to Cache County, clear down to the town of Newton. And an interesting observation I had was I was looking at SnowTel information, and just about 6 miles west of this landslide is Oxford Spring SnowTel. And about the time this happened, they were at 165% of snowpack at Oxford Spring, which was the wettest SnowTel in the Bear River Basin. Since then, it's gone to 195% or something like that. And I don't know, I haven't looked at it for the last few days, but it has gone up close to 200% snowpack at Oxford Spring. And I wonder if this had something to do with all the earth moving. But and I went up and physically looked at the area, and as fascinating and detailed as these photos are that Ethan and Brad and Carl took, to see it in person, it's just really a devastating amount of earth that's moved down on top of them.
Will we
You'll
see pictures as part of the
in
presentation?
Board
Great.
meeting, yeah, we'll
Thanks.
have them in there. So, yeah, I was just gonna say, so Ethan Stainer is the project manager. Carl Eggy, if you don't know, is our geologist. And when stuff like this happens, we beg him to leave the office and go romp around in the mud. And it's really hard to twist his arm, just kidding. So he went up and they went with Brad Caldwell, other project manager. And they said at some places they think it's about 30 feet deep, this mudslide. And it went into the canal and then up. And you can see a little bit of a dent in the pictures where it happened there. But there have been three landslides, and Carl just said they're just landslides everywhere. I don't know if Ethan put the picture of the tree, but there's a tree that looks like it was at the bottom and that the mud went around. No, the tree had been at the top and it stayed upright and just moved with this. They really don't know when it happened. Yeah, there you go. And they really don't know when it happened. It's all private landowners and it's just kind of out there. Carl said it was very difficult to get around in a vehicle. And the hard part is let's dig out the canal. But then you got all this mud that now would have more movement. Yeah. And trying to go in and excavate that while it's still wet. So yeah, not really sure what they're going to do, but we told them, I said, let's at least get you on the board meeting and kind of go from there. So the idea is they might end up piping in the future or even with this, but for now they're like, let's focus on the excavation portion of it. So that's what's going on. This is at least getting authorized for the excavation. And then when we do committal of funds, because they've got to go do all the legal work, if they need additional money for branching out on that project, we can do that.
Do we require a geotech type stabilization report or something that, I mean, you don't just go in
Yeah.
and dig it because
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. We can talk to Carl about that. Ethan, I
I'm
think
not
is,
saying it's needed. I'm not going to,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not my expertise.
no,
but
it's a great question. And Ethan's online and Ethan, that'd be a good thing for you to write down to maybe check in with Carl about. I don't know. I don't know if they can get any rigs up on top of that to, do anything, but it's basically cutting off most of the supply. It's only a couple miles downstream from their diversion off the Bear.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't think we have oh, there it is. So on the first map, it's kind of hard to see. Up here in the top right corner, it says West Cache Diversion Canal. So up here. So it's upstream of that, but it's just a whole area where it's just prone to slide. So, yeah.
It's been 30 years ago, we had a slide that took place west of my place. The interesting thing was the canal and actually.
Excuse me, could you please speak into your mic?
Sorry, I say years ago, probably 30 years ago now, there was a canal west of my place. But the canal itself, it actually was wet enough that the soils froze and the slide came down, went under the canal and slid below. And you had the canal sitting here still intact above the slide that came down and took it out underneath, and it was basically suspended. The weirdest slide I ever have been involved in. But you've about got to go in and I hate to say it, but you just dip and dip and dip and chuck until you can get it to stop flowing, because there's no other option. Because you can't go in and stabilize a slide that's there. All you can do is scoop and throw,
I don't know
push
what
it
is
out with
about
a
your age,
dozer
Ronnie.
and spread the load so that it
Yeah.
doesn't continue to slide.
And it's on private land, so they
Well,
do have an easement. So where are they going to put it is
Yeah.
another thing that, they're just, Charlie, you
So is
know.
this just a feasibility, what we're doing today,
Yes,
right?
for authorization. Yeah.
Yeah, it is an emergency.
Yeah.
And
They've got to be able to
Just-
do it.
just to add a little more to it before Kyle jumps in. This area is pretty close to Red Rocks, which was where Lake Bonneville breached and went to the Snake River. And so all of this ground is just clay.
Mm.
There is not a rock in it anywhere, and it's just like greased soil. I have spoken to Steve Wood this morning, and when we're discussing this
He's
project,
their engineer.
yes,
Yeah.
he's here today and will be here at the regular meeting. And he had a request from West Cache. They're anticipating using a skid steer loader to move a lot of this or move rock back in to reinforce the canal. And they are anticipating the rental cost of a skid steer loader will be so high that they are wondering, and I told him I had no recollection of this ever happening. They are wondering if they can purchase a skid steer loader to do this work rather than rent one. And I said, I don't have that kind of, I've never heard of that authorization before, I told him.
So we have actually reimbursed for even the secondary metering projects where they're doing their own work. We've done some reimbursement for those sorts of things rather than trying to rent a vehicle or rent equipment. They actually just purchase it. We get, and so we do check on those things. And usually we do check with board member Shalane. Any thoughts on? Yeah, so it's something, if it's an appropriate expense, it would be good, and Ethan can talk to them about getting an estimate of what it would take to rent versus purchasing it. And I know at one point they were talking and like, oh, if we could get, oh, there's Ethan. They said if we could get like 5 guys on that thing and going 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, it might take us 40 days. So I don't know if that's a Bible 40 or, 40. Ethan, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think, yeah, you covered it pretty well.
Yeah, those are the kind of expenses that we don't necessarily like to do all the time, but if it's a legitimate project cost and if it's a reasonable, as Marisa said, some projects we have, where the city needs a piece of equipment to accomplish the work and be able to properly maintain those facilities down the road. It's a legitimate project cost. So this is one, if they're going to have to rent for a significant amount of time, that could be a large expense. If they can find I guess we'd hope a good used at a good price as probably more reasonable to do that, and especially seeing the pictures that you'll all see. Yeah, it's a big task that they've got ahead of them.
I hate to discourage the thoughts of using a track skid steer, but you're going to liquefy that whole bank if you run back and forth that much with the machine. You're better off with track hoe and walk them out there and gently sling material. You're just going to bury a skid steer.
And Steve will be here for the board meeting. I don't think he's here yet, Steve Wood. He will be here physically for the board meeting, and also they'll be online. So that's something that could be brought up to him.
For moving this type of material, you're better to leapfrog from one track hoe to another and pass material, because you'll just liquefy that whole canal bank. That's what I've learned from experience over the years.
I just had
Material is a mess.
a question looking at the map. Are there 3 locations where there's mudslides? You look at the map initially and automatically your eyes drawn to the bold yellow, but then there's looking closer, there's the little red circle and also the that's blue.
I guess it's blue, yeah.
You might bring half
Ethan,
that
I
thing.
know that the main one is the yellow. Did the other 2 occur after or they already happened and it was one of those things where they want to include it because they're going to be doing all this work.
My understanding was that they happened at the same time. I could be wrong, but we only got to see the yellow because that's where you could go where with the road. I mean, it blocks off the road, so we couldn't really get to the other ones, but
We didn't want the state to pay for the truck that Ethan and Brad and Carl were in.
Choppers get you there.
These guys sent their
for the field trip.
drone
Oh, yeah.
up there, and
Yeah,
there's
they sent
some really good drone footage of these smaller slides.
I have probably like an unfair question, but I'll ask it nevertheless. So, I understand like this is kind of just what, feasibility we're authorizing with these certain amounts, but, I'll have to kind of get in there and kind of figure out the next step. Do you have any idea of magnitude of what this could look like beyond 425 at 0% interest for, like I said, it's kind of an unfair question, but
Right.
it could just give us a sense of,
Well, and the thing that we
How-
could do also is it might take them a while to decide if they're actually going to put in a pipeline in this
Okay.
area. So we could do a second
Feasibility
project
maybe,
and at least
okay. Okay.
either way for the, because it would go probably over $1 million borrowing from
okay.
us.
Okay.
And that would not be able to be at the 0%.
Okay.
Ethan, what were some of the numbers earlier when they were talking about the pipeline in it? I think it was really even back of a napkin. I think it was a dirty napkin. So
Yeah.
I don't remember exact numbers, but a lot more.
Yeah.
it was
lot
at
more.
least a couple million or more.
Yeah.
Trying to decide that because there's the concerns of we put a pipe in and is it a whole thing going to move? And that's never happened, huh, Charlie? Put in a pipe and then it moves again. I can't think of their name. It's one of the other projects. So
Okay. So it might, let's just see what this comes of this and but
Yeah.
it might make sense.
we could
to
do another
separate it out just
application
to
though and
keep it clean.
and handle it that way.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I had a quick one. Has this ever happened before?
It happens fairly frequently. My canal company, Bear River Canal Company, has occasional landslides like
I meant in
this.
this area.
In this area, yes, it happens frequently.
Yeah, Carl
This
said you
canal
could see
company
signs of
works.
other landslides that just didn't hit the canal. But when these canals were put in, they were banking on gravity. And so they had to go up to get the gravity. And so, and we're dealing with a historic year. When was Garden City's Hodges? Was that 2 years ago?
Yeah, year and a half, 2
And
years
it
ago.
slammed with, wet and it slid down. There were some other things going on below it as well, but it's up on the side of a hill and it's been so saturated.
So has the board authorized funding for this area to clean up the same
No.
projects before?
No, we've
Or the
done
same-
projects for West Cache, but not for something like this.
So they haven't needed money when it's slid before.
I don't know of any other situations they've had. Yeah. Ethan, have they had other slides kind of into a canal and they've had to fix things up? Did they ever say that? We haven't funded it.
They've definitely had other slides. I don't know if they specifically mentioned into the canal, but they've had a lot of other slides in that area.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this is Tom Cox. If just from the picture that I've seen, you can tell that they've cleaned those sections of canal multiple times because of the buildup that they've dug out and dumped. So yes, it's happened before, but even though they may have not come to the board to get funding to do the repair works.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Tom and Ethan. All right. If there aren't any other questions, we should probably move on. Charles, I assume you'll make the motion on this one.
I don't think we have drone movie in the drone pit stuff in the presentation,
All right.
but we do
Dang.
have some pretty good photos. We can send some out. Yeah. And as I've heard from those that've been on the site, that doesn't even do it justice.
Wow.
So
Okay. All right. Thanks, Marisa. All right, let's go ahead and move on to committal of funds. We'll go over, we've got two projects that are ready for committal of funds. And Ben, I think you're going to help us with the information on both of them. The first one is RL 590, the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake City and Sandy. This is in my area. I'll just let Ben go over it. I think you'll recall we did the feasibility on this a couple of months back, and it's kind of unique the way that it was put together, but I'll just let Ben go ahead and.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the board. It's lovely to be here. So I'm standing in for Bradley Caldwell on this project. I believe he is online.
Great.
So I'll give just a brief overview, and Bradley, when I'm done, if you have any additional comments, please feel free to chime in. Yeah, the purpose of the project is to purchase and install about 2.5 miles of seismic resilient steel pipeline, which varies in diameter from 60 to 72 inches, and about 2,400 feet of 54-inch HDPE pipe, and improvements at the site of Little Cottonwood Water Treatment Plant. Apparently, this is a phased project. The applicants received bids for phase 1, and the lowest bid came in about $13.5 million above the engineer's estimate. So the total estimated cost of the project is going to go from about $50 million to $68 million. However, the board's funding amount is going to remain as authorized, and the repayment terms will not change. The applicant is they're going to increase their market bond to cover the increase in cost.
You'll recall, and maybe Ben, you can correct me if I'm stating this incorrectly, but you'll recall that we're trying to help them kind of target a rate so that overall their borrowing cost is about 3% overall. And so that's where I think as they're going to borrow from the private sector, they have a rate of 4.4%. And so that's where then we come in with a portion of the cost, and that interest rate that we're providing helps them to get like their overall borrowing cost at about 3%. Does that sound?
Right. Yeah.
Correct.
This is
So it's a
this
little
is an
different.
interest rate buy down. I think this is the first one that I've ever seen with my time here. But yeah, that's correct. So the money will be. It's kind of like when you are mortgaging your house, you can put down a little bit extra money to buy a lower interest rate. And I think this is kind of similar to that effect.
Yeah, and I appreciate this approach, and that it's a large amount of money. Sometimes I'm kind of concerned about, are we competing with on these types of projects, are we actually competing with the private sector in terms of the finances? And so I think this is like a nice way for, the private sector to be engaged, and then us to work with the public applicant to just make sure that their costs are reasonable.
I guess I should mention that the interest rate is going to drop from 4.42% down to 3%, or an effective interest rate of 3%. And then the money, and I'll read the actual motion in the meeting, but the money it will be repaid over 20 years to the board. 20. That's right. It's separated in a period of 20 years and then another period of 5 years. It looks like.
That's right.
Bradley, did you have any additional comments you wanted to make?
No, you did great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Well,
Any
I got one
questions or
question.
comments? think
I
Randy-
got one question, Ben. So what is seismic resilient pipe? That one, curious how they determine seismic resilience.
Bradley, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
I mean, Wayne probably knows better, and he's in the back. I see him.
We appreciate that. Wayne, will,
I just
Yeah.
never heard pipe explained in quite this manner, and I'm curious, you're thickening the pipe to suspend itself, or?
Well, it's a real special magic pipe that we.
Well, that's what I wondered if it
For-
was
Mr. Windsor, for
there's-
purposes of
there's-
the record, will you just please state your name and affiliation just for purposes for the
Madam
record? Thank
Chair.
you.
Wayne Windsor, Assistant General Manager for the Metropolitan Water District, Salt Lake and Sandy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. To your question, sir, it is a response to the technology that we use to design the pipeline to withstand what they call feasibility for earthquake. So it's a seismic event that which the pipe will respond by, if the ground was to slip, it will still stay intact. It'll be probably 10 feet in the air, but it'll still stay intact and still be able to allow water to process through until we were able to modify it. So
you're thickening and stiffening and
it's one
building
inch
it.
thick steel pipe.
Okay, so it allows to carry itself. That's what I wondered. I just hadn't seen it referred to in that manner before. So I assume it's all welded seams.
Yes, sir. This
All
section's
welded
36
seams.
inch. It'll be welded steel,
Yeah.
1 inch thick in that particular area.
Well, that makes sense. I appreciate that. I just hadn't seen it listed in that particular manner before. So thank you.
We're setting a trend.
Good.
Any other questions or comments on this one? All right. Mike, do you mind making the motion on this one for me since it's in my area?
I'd be. Yes, I'll be happy.
I
to do
appreciate
that.
it. Thank you very much. Okay, and then the other committal of funds is RM 110 Syracuse City. Kyle, did you want to share any insight before Ben goes through this one with us?
No, I don't have any information, additional information to add, so we'll just let Ben go ahead. I'm assuming you're sitting in for Ann.
That's right. I'll be sitting in for Ani Bader on this
Ani.
one. So I'm a resident of Syracuse City, but this is neither my project nor my motion, so I don't think there's any conflict of interest there. So it looks like in August of 2022, the board committed $10 million to the Syracuse City as part of an ARPA grant. At that time, there was a cap at $10 million and they hit it. And because of that cap, typically our project cost percentages on ARPA grants are 70%. But because they hit the cap, they were below that. And so when additional ARPA money, or when another application period for ARPA money came open, they were allowed to submit another application. And in October 2023, they were given an additional $1,479,000 in ARPA funds. And at that time, the board also authorized $4,182,000 as a loan. And assuming, since the project is here before you're on committal today, that they are prepared to make that jump. So you can see the project cost breakdown. Looks like we're looking at a total of $16,400,000. And I'll ask Ani if she has any additional comments to make on that. Or is she?
It just remains as committed as
Okay.
authorized.
All right.
So just Shalane was just confirming that it remains as authorized. All right. Any questions or comments on this one?
I'll be prepared to make the motion for that, but I'll just have a question relative to, and based on the discussion we had earlier on your presentation, Shalane, would this be one that we could possibly expect request for additional funding to come in? That's putting you on the spot, but
I don't think so. The additional grant funds we gave, so when we did the third round of ARPA applications and we opened it up to those who had already received their maximum before, now we were moving into the other pot of money where the caps applied again. Syracuse was the only one that actually was ranked at the top and qualified for 100% of their request. The additional $1,479,000 in ARPA grant that they got last October brought them up to the 70%.
okay.
So this is the total needed. When they first applied for ARPA grant funding, they didn't think they would need loan funds. When they came back for the second round or the third round, their second grant amount, they said, well, we think we do need to borrow some money. And so that's when the board authorized the loan for the secondary meter project. But I don't think they'll be eligible or be requesting additional funds. They've got their 70% grant. This is just the loan portion is all we're asking for committal of today.
It's the same amount of meters as the first
Yes,
It's not additional meters.
right.
Shalane, do you want to
This was
repeat
not-
just
Yeah,
for the
this
record?
was, as Marisa said, this was not like other of the applicants who requested additional funds to be able to install additional meters. This was for the same meters, just to bring them up to the 70%.
Thank you for that explanation. So
All right, very
Thank
good.
you.
Okay. Well, so we'll plan on Kyle making the motion and we can move on to special items. And Marisa's going to present the first one, which is RE 296 East Mill Creek Water Company. I think they're seeking a modification of repayments, and I'll be completely honest, I'm actually not super close to this one, so I'll have to lean on Marisa to brief us on
No one
what
is.
they're
It's
asking
been a
of.
while.
Yeah.
On this one.
Wow. Oh, wow. I didn't hear I'm saying I'm not super close. I was not
you weren't even here.
participating in the time, so I'm going to make myself feel a
Yeah,
little bit better about that. That was quite a
2011.
while ago, 2011.
My children were 1 and 7. So no, I don't even know. I can't do the math now. 1 and 5. And just a heads up, I did get an email from Brian Steed. As soon as his commitment clears up, he's going to jump online. We're watching for him in case he needs to be approved to let in. Hopefully he can just get in. So just be aware of that. So East Mill Creek came to us back in 2011. This was for a diversion structure. And actually Bill Leaflang, who used to work for us, he was a board member of the company, and one of their ditches ran behind my parents' back of their house. And so, and even the engineer from Bowen Collins had grown up in the area. So it was kind of cool. For those of you that are familiar with Salt Lake City, the 2700 East, the S curve, we call it, there was a diversion structure that needed to be replaced, and a flume. The original flume, wooden flume, was there. And so it was a great project. We found out that they hadn't made the last 2 payments. Finance had let us know, Division of Finance. We reached out and I told Shalane, and she said, I bet they had a change of officers. So called them, and sure enough, they'd had a change of officers, and the secretary treasurer had gone on an LDS mission with her husband, and info didn't get passed down. A lot of you know how that goes. So there were 2 payments that were needed, I think, in 2020 and 2021 that they didn't make. When we talked with them, they immediately, very quickly made 1 payment. The balance was over $24,000. So they made a payment of $8,000 and change to bring it down to this even $16,000 that's remaining. And they've asked for the board to give them 2 more years, allow them 2 more years to pay these off at $8,000 a piece. And so the secretary, the newer secretary, was just distraught, and they feel really bad that this happened. We will have at least one of them, if not a couple of them, online today. And we reassured them things happen. The mail was literally going to her house. As you know, these smaller companies, it's sometimes like that. And so those things have been fixed, and they have all new officers. So that's what's going on with this one.
Shalane, what were the original annual payments and the amount? Or Shalane, I'm sorry, Marisa.
That's okay. I don't mind being confused for Shalane.
Everyone's in good company. So
And then I just realized the email I sent Shalane yesterday and kept saying, why didn't you get it? I sent it to Candace. So there you go. And
See,
Candace was like, this is a great
all
email.
these
Thanks.
amazing women who work for water resources.
So I'm not showing it on here. I can't remember. I thought I had it on here, but I don't. I believe it was upwards of 16,000 or so.
Okay.
And in fact, yeah, I can't remember exactly at this time. So
And we can even ask them maybe.
yeah. And we can look it up
Okay.
also.
I have the littlest bit of heartburn about, I feel like, just generally, I think if, ever it feels like we should try to work with those that we're lending money to when we can, and we have the ability to, and if it doesn't impact other things. But I will say that I give a little bit of heartburn because I know that if I forgot to, send my check to the tax commission, I'm not sure that they would be, as flexible.
It's not a problem. Don't worry about it.
So that's what I'm just going to go on the record with I've got a bit of concern about this. They're relatively small amounts, and I think we have to think about the whole and how it impacts this particular company and our ability to continue to support what we support. But I'll just say that that's where I'm a little.
Can I give you a little more
concerned.
background on this
Yeah.
company? So when I was the project manager at the time. And so when we worked with them, I was sitting in the secretary's house and I said, oh, can I see your shareholder list? Because it goes through my neighborhood I grew up in. And I looked at the shareholder list and I go, they've passed away, they moved, they passed away, they moved. So all those shareholders, including the neighbors across the street, they'd either passed away or moved.
Yeah.
And I told them, I said, I bet you that none of these new residents are using your secondary water. So they weren't getting any income from that. So I know that's been an issue over the years as well.
And I will just say, oh, Tom raised his hand. Just a second, Tom. I pulled up the emails that started all
Yeah,
of this
okay.
coming from finance. Their payments had been just over $13,000 and they made them faithfully. They were not an applicant who was ever late on a payment. They weren't short, delinquent in any way. They had faithfully made their payments. And that's why when finance finally contacted us and said, hey, you have this project that's sitting out there and hasn't had a couple of payments. Of course, that happened COVID and secondary meters. So we were like, oh yeah, we'll figure it out. And didn't get right on it. So the reason it's taken this long is because we finally had time to breathe and reach out and contact the right people, because that's another part of it. When it's the secretary's home address and phone number and the secretary moves, you got to do a little more effort to try to track down the new one. But Marisa finally did that, contacted them, and they said, oh, well, since nobody was getting bills, we thought we had finished paying.
Yes, okay. Yes.
So to realize they still had an outstanding balance, they were mortified.
The secretary actually stepped down, the new one.
Okay.
So she felt horrible.
So they felt really bad about it. They are willing to accept whatever you decide to impose. We just felt like in this instance, leniency is appropriate.
This is what they asked. They said, what if we do this? And we said, we'll put it towards the board.
Okay. All right.
So,
Yeah, please go ahead,
yeah.
Mike.
I'm totally okay with what you've proposed. I do have a little bit of concern, similar, that we do so many projects. Are we setting some sort of a precedent that now perhaps another company may say, well, geez, those guys got away with it. Maybe we can, things are a little short, so we'll beg for forgiveness rather than asking permission.
Well, I'll just tell you, it's not precedent because it's happened several times before.
Well, with that, do we have a policy then that addresses this? And do we say if you miss a payment, you have to pay a fee, but we could waive the fee or something to that effect?
Well, and it really does. We work with every single applicant as an individual entity when they come to us, because a lot of it doesn't depend on how they come to us. We've had some, you all may remember a few years back, some of you were on the board and may remember, we had an entity that was almost always late with their payments, and they had multiple projects and were late all the time. And so we as staff, we will sometimes waive late fees, late penalties, if it's an unusual thing. We were not willing to do this with that entity. They came to the board and said, can you restructure our payments? They had increasing payments, so it was getting harder and harder to pay. So staff recommended and the board agreed to level out the payments, give them a longer time to make those repayments steady. But the board was unwilling to waive the late fees. That was part of the request of the applicant, and staff didn't recommend that they waive them, and the board didn't, even though the applicant asked. So we treat each individual applicant as we see fit. So I don't think we're setting precedent by saying, hey, we're giving you leniency. I think the fact that they came out and said, well, this is what we have on hand now here, and made a payment. What can we get? Can we get it 2 more years to make the remaining payments? We said we will recommend that to the board, because I think we're comfortable with that, having had the chat with them, knowing where they are. Others, we might not do that. Others we might say, like, you guys just haven't got your act together, and so we're not going to do that. But
I worry because usually they don't want to raise their water rates or
right.
their fees. And I understand that. Nobody wants that to
Right.
happen, but they did make a commitment.
Yes.
But I agree in this, with what you've done. Thank
Okay.
you.
And if I may on
Yeah,
this.
Go ahead. Yeah,
The new officers had no idea there were still payments to be made.
sure.
So someone who might have known, should have known, was gone. And they thought it was done. And there were 2 years left.
Again, these are small, relatively small amounts of money. Relative, I'm just
Yes.
acknowledging that no amount of money is small when it's taxpayer money. But could we impose interest over this? What was the original interest? It was originally 0. Okay, okay.
Double it.
Yeah.
Triple the interest.
I mean,
Okay.
the original loan
Yeah.
amount was
Okay.
only
That's what it's
$130,000.
yeah, it's relatively small. Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, there was no interest on a $130,000 loan. So yeah, we're okay with just
Okay.
saying
Okay.
16,000, we'll give you 2 years to pay that.
Yeah,
But
go
if
ahead.
you are,
Yeah.
And I will say I've gotten a letter that from the IRS that said, oh, you messed up. And I'm like, oh, scrud. So, and I had to pay. Along those lines, I think we've only had one project that said, well, why don't you guys just take over our system? And we said no. And so, because that's what it would end up
Yeah.
if they can't pay us,
Yeah.
and we don't really want a water system. If I may, just in the full disclosure, I do live in the neighborhood that it ran behind my dad's. He wasn't a shareholder. I don't live there anymore, and neither do my parents. But in the 17 something years I've been doing this, whenever something like this has happened, there's been a couple of rascals that we, deal with, are a little more strict about it. But I really feel like I'm hearing people saying something has happened, and it's, I haven't heard anyone, well, so-and-so got. So I think we're, dealing with a lot of people who are just trying, especially some of these smaller systems, to get things figured out, so.
Well, I'm okay supporting the staff recommendation, given the conversation and the fact that it is a recommendation that's coming out of the division. So I'll just say that. Are there any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Just when we send out a request for payment
Yeah.
and somebody's moved, does the U.S. Postal Service not return mail?
Well, I'll just say this, it isn't us that sends out a request for payment, it's the Division of Finance.
Yeah.
So it's another one of those layers of bureaucracy that gets involved. So sometimes they might not.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it takes more than one missed payment for finance to reach out to us and say, hey, this is out here. What do you want to do about it? What's happening with it? And so this is one that, yeah, it slipped. We missed it in the hustle and bustle of COVID
Yeah.
primarily.
And I will say, I've been on that end.
Yeah.
Where the state sends an invoice to us or something. They don't tell you what it's for.
Right.
And let
It's
me
not
tell
the
you,
clearest statement,
when
right?
they come like to the county and all of a sudden there's somebody walking around, do you know what this is for? Do you know what this is for? I mean, literally, nobody knows what it's for.
But you're
and-
just supposed to
And
send
you
a check
can't
in.
call anybody to figure it out because you didn't know where it came from. So I have a lot of sympathy for that situation.
Yeah, I just had that question, and I wondered if it was a postal service problem, but
Well, and I don't know in this instance where it was someone on a mission, maybe she just had her mail held for a while until they came home. I don't know.
yeah.
We don't have the circumstances, but I mean, like Marisa said, that was my initial response because I've dealt with plenty of companies over the years where all of a sudden we get a notice that someone missed a payment. You reach out to contact the secretary. Oh, this is their daughter. They passed, or, whatever it is. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, do you happen to know who is the secretary? So-
Madam Chairman, if I might try to summarize, or this is just my personal opinion, and the board certainly doesn't have to agree or anything, but I feel like in this instance, it's an honest mistake that happened. The company, from my understanding, is doing their best to try to, they were willing to put what the funds they had on account towards it. They've came up with a proposed solution to address it. And I don't think we're out of line to work with them. I certainly am supportive of what's being proposed, and I'd leave it
Thank
at
you.
that.
Randy, do you mind making a motion on this one? So it's in my area. If you
Sure.
wouldn't mind covering that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
All
I have
right.
a comment
Yeah,
to
go
make.
for it, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I think it's great that staff has the ability to treat everybody as an individual. And sometimes if you over policy yourself, something honest does come up and then you tie your own hands. So I prefer them bringing that to us and, we can be the bad guys and say, no, you're paying those penalties. You've been late for years. Versus, I'm sorry, I can't do anything to help you. And it makes our customer service in the division better, and it makes, how we're seen by those entities. And well, they're great to work with. And it was, the process was easy and we messed up and they still were kind. And, those kind of things mean a lot to people. And to
And
me
it
in
is in your
particular.
rules that you can ignore a recommendation. So it's
Well,
kind of
right.
in policy. It's in the
That's what I
rules.
mean, is that
Yeah.
it's like you, though, could work with them and be helpful. And then, if the board was against it, then we could have figured that out. But, I like the way it is what I was trying to say.
I like you guys being the bad guys too. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
that's.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Tom had raised his hand a little
Oh,
bit
that's
ago.
right. Yeah.
Did you still have something to say, Tom?
I was just gonna say, I looked up their repayment, and based on the last report to the board, the payment was 13,200 per year.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, ladies. Let's go ahead and move on to special item RE 479 Lehigh City. This is in your area, Mike. Is there anything you want to share before I think Marisa gives us a bit of a briefing?
Well, I think
And
Teresa will say it all.
You can defer to me. I'm going to defer to Tom. So look at that. He comes through loud and clear. I was planning to talk, but he sounds great.
I think something just happened to my mic. No, Lehigh City, they'll be back before the board for some additional funds for their meter project. In the round one, they received $10 million in ARPA grant funds, and then accompanying loan funds to go along with that. And that amount was based just on the cap that they could receive at that time. And that was enough to install about 5,700 meters. They have about 14,000 meters that they need to, or connections they need to meter. So in the second round, they applied for another 10 million in grant, but there wasn't that much ARPA grant money available. So the board authorized and committed just over 6.2 million in ARPA grant funds, and authorized the accompanying loan funds. But we have another secondary meter grant fund pot. It's a small secondary system meter grant that the board has, I think, approved to have $2 million go into that pot per year. And so fiscal year, that's right. And so we can only carry over $2 million at the end of the fiscal year. And we haven't really been using that because of all the ARPA grant funds. So we're in danger of having almost $2 million of those grants lapse at the end of the fiscal year. So we were looking at ways to utilize that money, and thought that maybe if we gave some more grant money to Lehigh, because they didn't get what they requested on the second round, then that would could help both of us out. The city would get some more grant money, and we would have an opportunity to use that small secondary system meter grant, not have that lapse. So the city will be before the board today, and it's basically because of our request that they apply for this. And they'll be requesting $3.776 million or so in the small secondary system grant money, and an additional $1,376,000 in loan funds towards their meter project. And that will bring them up to the numbers that they had originally requested in the second round. So they'd have a total of $10 million in grant and 3.643 million in loan funds. So there will be two motions the board will have to pass, and that will be to authorize and commit the small secondary system grant funds and authorize the additional 1.376 million in loan funds for their meter project. Are there any questions the board may have on that?
Madam Chair, this is Blaine. I have a question for you, Tom. I'm a little bit turned around. Maybe, Tom, you can straighten me back out. We have the discussion on here about small system secondary meter grants are 5,000 connections. And then we say in the same paragraph that there will be 5,700 connections, which is more than 5,000 connections. So straighten me out on what is this discussion on small system secondary meters? Because apparently Lehigh does not qualify as a small system because it has more than 5,000.
Can I clarify that? I
All
was
right,
just going to
Ken.
jump in.
Go ahead, Blaine.
Okay, so I wanted to provide a little more information on the small system grants. So there's two qualifications for a small system. And the first is that you be a city, town, or metro township, or have fewer than 5,000 connections. So it's not an and, it's an or. So cities qualify regardless of size. That is why when we were directed not to lose any more of the small system funding, because we lost some last year. Because here's the issue, we bring them to you. We haven't brought one for a while because we've been so caught up in ARPA, as was stated. The small system grant funds can't be used for more than 50% of project costs. So not the 70 that ARPA has been for. So we've used them on a couple projects to say, okay, we'll fund this one 50% with the small system grant and then provide 20% of ARPA funds to get them up to that 70 to be able to use both funds to try not to lose them. The problem comes in, we don't really dictate when people actually use the money. And just because the money's contracted doesn't mean it's counted as spent. Until it actually goes out the door, it's sitting in our pot and at risk of losing it. So because the fiscal year ends every year on June 30th and the new one starts July 1st, if we don't get some more money out the door by July 1st, we're going to lose it. So we were talking and said, look, we've been told you can't lose this money. The legislature is going to take it. This is something they set up before ARPA money was available. They've continued to give it to us every year. So we've got to find a way to spend it in and amongst this ARPA grant. And we said, well, of all the people that didn't get all that they asked for in the third round, where we had to do the prioritization and ranking, they're all big systems. None of them qualify except for the one city. We said Lehigh is actively working, trying to get as many meters in the ground as possible. They're billing us for large amounts. They're sending in reimbursement requests for large amounts of money. And we said, this is one we could commit some funds to, actually get money spent before June 30th so that we didn't risk losing it. So we'll even talk about that in the status of funds because it looks bad when you look there. But this is part of dealing with the different funding sources and when they run out. So we went to Lehigh and said, we have a way for you to fund more meters if you can do this quickly, we need to get this money spent. We aren't aware of any other small systems that qualify under the actual number of connections that don't have funding. So we didn't have anyone else to go to. So we went to Lehigh. Said, would you submit an application? They said, sure.
So we can blame ARPA for having lost money in the past. Okay.
A little
Sure,
bit.
something like that. And if I may, we did this on Linden City, but in reverse. Linden
Right.
City wanted to get started before the ARPA funds. So we did a 50-50 small system grant for them. And we said, hey, when ARPA comes around, we'll make you whole to that 70%. So we only did 20%, to make that equal for them on that. Pleasant Grove, we've also done this on.
Pleasant Grove, Heber, and Centerville
City.
Dual Creek.
But I think I think it's Heber City or Pleasant Grove that's 1.9% from the small system, so it's not going anywhere. But Lehigh's been sending quarterly reimbursement requests to the tune of $2-3 million. And if we can reimburse them at 26.4% even, that gets a good chunk out the door. And that's just coming up in March. And then we're going to ask them really nicely, Tom, to get another one in before June 30th to make sure. Huh?
He already
I
has.
already have.
Yeah.
They're going to submit one in June and one in the first week in July that counts towards the fiscal year,
Perfect.
the current fiscal year.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And
And
just
so,
for the
go
board's
ahead.
information, Lehigh City's already spent just over $8 million in ARPA grant. And they anticipate $3 or $4 million being spent before the end of the fiscal year. So yeah, they are going through the money. But even with this chunk of money, they still won't have enough to meter all of their connections. They'll still be about 2,600 meters short. And they estimate that'll be about $6.5 million. So they'll be looking for money somewhere else too, or another time anyway. Hopefully grant money.
Great. And just a couple other things, if I can. The amounts of the grants, the ARPA versus the small system, they don't add together to make that limit. That small system, that limit that currently is 10 million is on ARPA funds. And just a side note, that's been doubled in the last legislative session. So they can also get on top of that, the small system funds. And there was one other thing I was thinking, and the first one that Tom talked about is not showing up in this cost estimate and sharing. The first 10 million was RM001. So it's not included in this. That one's the one where they've spent about 8 million. So RM074 is that third application period. And then RE479 is the small secondary. And Tom will figure out all the paperwork perfectly.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? I'll just maybe just make the point to go on the record that, sometimes you'll see, right, like I study public finance and this is kind of my place. And so sometimes you see this behavior in the public sector of just like spending down money to spend down. Like we have to spend this money before the end of the year because otherwise it lapses back to some sort of general fund. And so sometimes you see like, all these IT purchases at the end of the year, or these things that are not really productive. And so I just want to just go on the record on this in particular. It's not just about spending down the money, as you mentioned. This is really going to use for these secondary meters in a place where, it's going to go much farther than they would have been able. Now they still have a lot to go, but I appreciate the work of the staff to kind of figure out how to deploy these funds to get this type of conservation in Utah. So thank you, because I know that's extra work for you to figure out how to do that. So
We just
thank
want
you.
Jim Egbert to stop emailing us about the money, our accountant.
Thank
Well,
you.
and I
Yeah.
will note,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, that we've also had discussions. Candace has pointed out that we really need to figure out how to get the word out about this small system grant so that if there are small systems out there that we aren't aware of, and I tried to do that, especially I had a chat with the gentleman after my presentation today. He's like, we've got to connect. We've got like 35 shareholders and he's trying to figure out if he's even required to meter or not. It's mostly farmland. A few use it on their lawns and gardens. they pull water from the Virgin River. Doesn't really sound like you're probably required to meter at this point, but if you decide you do, we have this available. So, but we've got to figure out a way to get that advertised a little better so that if there are some of these that have not been privy to the ARPA funds and then realize they do need to do something with metering, we've got it available for these small systems. So we want to make sure we find a way to get the word out there, not just to these big cities who already have all this big money, but are also eligible.
Yes,
So
we appreciate that. And I don't know, maybe that's something that we can work with the legislature on in the future too, about getting that money non-lapsing or maybe
Non-lapsing.
appropriated like finance mandated line item or something. I don't know. But it's just frustrating that, again, we're kind of scrambling to put the money to good use and there's a lot of good use out there. So thank you. All right. Go ahead,
Just
Kyle.
one other comment. In a past life, those end of year IT purchases were legit.
Oh, no. In the state of Utah, in the Department of Agriculture, as I looked at those numbers, of course they were legit. Just elsewhere. All right. Let's go on to the next agenda items. And I imagine that, Mike, you're okay making the motion on that one. Okay. So I guess I just have to note this, right? The new applications, RE481, we've got Peterson Pipeline Association in the pipeline as a new application. So we'll look for a feasibility report in the future on that. It looks like we're going to have a report from Shalane on secondary meter grants. ARPA?
asking for a new deadline, because, last year we asked you to set a deadline and you did of January 1st. And we said, okay. And then there's proposed changes to the law. And we said, we can't enforce this deadline if people don't know if they really need the money or not, because what are they going to do? They're going to say, well, we'll keep it until we know if we really, because we don't want to give it up until we know we don't need it. So now we're asking you to set a new deadline of May 17th so that as Marisa, because she's the one getting to make all these calls, primarily to entities who haven't entered contracts yet, trying to figure out what they're doing. But right, I know there are some already under contract and may have decided now they're exempt and don't need it. So she has asked that we have a new deadline, so there's some teeth to this to say, if you don't make a decision by May 17th, we're making it for you, and the funds will be released back to the board to be able to then spread the remaining out so we can get it contracted before the end of the year so that it can be spent by the end of 2026. So.
Are there any questions on that? Kyle, do you want to make that motion or?
I'd be happy to make that motion. I do have a question, or maybe just a comment or observation. Given that May 17th deadline and knowing our upcoming meeting cycle, will that give us the opportunity to be able to make
Yes.
the appropriate?
We will make it happen.
Yes,
We'll
we
make
will.
it happen,
Mhm.
okay.
Well, in this way, we figured by May 17th, we would at least have answers that we could discuss with you, how much funds are available in the June meeting. And that hopefully by August, we figured out where we can get those funds to, have recommendations for getting those out. So we can get them contracted. But yes, it's going to be a tight
window
process, but we'll make it happen.
If I can bring up something that goes along with this, we have companies that are exempt, but per the statute, as Shalane showed in her presentation, they can use the money, the ARPA money, for an alternative project for water conservation if, to the satisfaction of the board, it conserves more water than metering each end user of their system. So those are going to come before you, and they're going to have to show that they can conserve more water some other way, which for 18 months, a lot of folks that have a mixed ag secondary system were thinking, and so were some other people higher up thinking that it could be used for their ag system. It cannot. That's been made very clear to the legislature, thanks to Joel Williams. He gets to be the bad guy each one of those meetings and make a public comment about that. So we're giving them until May 17th to not only decide yes or no, but if you're keeping it to do an alternative project, we want to see what the plans and specs and cost estimate is. So they're going to have about 7 weeks to come up with that. That being said, many of them have had 18 months to contemplate this. And that gives us 6.5 months to get all of this money under contract.
Great.
And get through our board meetings and whatever else we need to do. So, yeah.
So is that particular issue adequately covered in the motion? That's the second part of it, or request modification to the existing grant?
Yes.
So they have to do both, one or the
Yes,
other by,
And we're even going to ask them if they say that, oh, we're going to use the money in meter, great, sign this thing here. And our great secondary team who's back home has done a great job coming up with our AG, some paperwork that says, no, we release the money. Yes, we're going to use the money, or we want to convert it to this and this amount. And then that way, if they say yes, and then somehow don't use it, it's at least on a piece of paper that said they would. And I don't know how much teeth that'll hold, but if they don't sign, yes, we're going to use it, then we'll be done. And
Yeah, and
they have
these
to
are,
sign something.
the staff has worked with the AG's office to create these lovely legal forms that say, I have the authority to sign this on behalf of the company, and here's our decision.
I am going to raise another question, and that is, in reading the motion, or request a modification to their existing grant.
Yes.
So they can request it by the 17th. They don't have to have it approved by the 17th.
Well, the board won't consider it by the 17th. What we're saying is they have to have these forms will have to be done, and Marisa will let them know. If you're requesting a modification, you're going to have the paperwork in by the 17th.
I will need to know what their design is and what their cost estimate is.
Okay.
So they can't just say, yeah, we want to modify it. They're
And
going
then
to
take-
have a
yeah.
plan.
And then
for
take
what that
7
is.
more months to
Make
figure it out what
right.
they're really going to do. We're going to push on them that this needs to be taken care of.
Right. You feel that language is sufficient to make that point that the modification includes?
They don't
You
need
need
full plans
more,
and
okay.
specs, but they need, most applications come to us with maybe 50-60% plans anyway. We never get the full amount until we go to committal of funds.
Okay.
But my concern is if they haven't been thinking about this for 18 months,
Yeah.
when will they be thinking about it?
Yeah. Okay.
So we don't have another 18 months.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you. I'm gonna do a time check here. Our full meeting, or actual meeting starts at 3 o'clock. I want to give us a little time to take a 5-minute break or so, and if that means we have to start a couple of minutes late, that's fine as well. But let's just try to keep getting through to the end of the agenda for the briefing. If it's okay with the board, we have the Bear River Development right-of-way update that Marisa's going to be giving
We'll
to
do
us.
it in
We
the
have,
board meeting.
yeah, so we have the information in our packet and we can get the full briefing it's just an update briefing in the board meeting. So that's okay. We'll go ahead and jump past that one. And then we will have a report on landscape incentives and landscape water savings estimator. And so let's go ahead and turn the time over to the information to the board. I imagine that we probably have a status of funds. I'll just turn time over to Candace to take us through the information.
Yes, that is the first item, is Charlene's going to provide a status of funds.
And so I'll be super quick. There's not a lot to say. You'll see not a lot has changed. Some of the items moving from today, we're asking you to commit funds on the Metro Water District project. So it'll move from authorization to committal. But there's not a lot of change in the status of funds. The one thing I did want to point out is that Lehigh project that we're bringing to you. If you look, small system secondary grant page, if you commit that grant today, authorize and commit that grant, it looks like we're going to end up in the hole. But this is part of that. What I was saying is that it's a numbers game. Yes, we'll be overcommitted, but we won't be overspent by the end of the year. And we'll get another $2 million on July 1st. There's no way we're going to spend that entire Lehigh amount, or as you can see, Centerville Dual Creek has been committed since a year ago. And they've still not contracted, which means they haven't spent any of it either. So needing to get some money out the door, we're able to overcommit knowing that more funds will be coming in July 1st. So we won't ever overspend a fund, but we'll overcommit this one just a little so that we can get that money going out the door.
If the Centerville Dual Creek is not contracted, what's the holdup on their end?
I think they were an entity that was trying to decide if maybe they would be exempt with the changes in the law. I think being in that area, they probably are not at this point. Centerville Dual Creek irrigation. But so I think they'll be moving forward now. I think there was a lot of just waiting on this legislation. So where it was signed into law last week, it'll go effect May 1st. So, and not anything official has changed on the ARPA funds at this point because it's all still authorized, committed, or contracted. But as I said, some of that may be coming back. So any questions on the status of funds? I see shaking heads. Good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Shalane. We've had quite a few and maybe I'll invite Joel Williams to come up and maybe just open it real quick. There's been a number of legislative updates at water users. Is there any particular questions you have, or, we're happy to go through it. I know our time is short, but anything that you guys want to cover, questions you want to ask?
What is the plan where we have put on our platter? Is it Senate Bill 280 or House Bill 280?
House Bill.
House Bill 280.
That's a good one to talk about. Joel, do you want to kind of give an overview on that? We can chat about it.
Yes. In the bill tracker that I had sent you all out to kind of follow the session, there's a tab created called Water Resources Action. It's the third tab in. And that one outlines the, let's see, I think it's 10 bills that have action for water resources in one way or another. And so under the House Bill 280 there, I've tried to outline the things that will be required to do. So one of them will be that completing our state water plan by end of December in 2026. And then this study about water funds, looking at all the state funding, water funding agencies, that's required to be done by October 31st of 2024. So we'll need to start on that one very soon because that's just later this year. We've started discussions with the state funding agencies. Candace chairs the Water Development Coordinating Council. We've met, and there's another meeting scheduled to get representatives from each of those state water funding agencies together and to start strategizing that game plan. The study of a water use fee is due October of 2025, but that'll be here before we know it. And I know there's been discussions already about how that might be approached. We don't have a game plan to reveal yet, but I know there's a lot of thoughts and discussions around that. And then there's other things to consider, the makeup of the Water Development Coordinating Council, and then the directors of water rights and water resources are non-voting members of the Utah Watersheds Council. We will need to prepare our list of water resources projects by June of next year, June of 2025. That's going to be quite an undertaking, and it'd be helpful for all of us to start spreading the word to any water providers that we're aware of that we're going to be collecting any known projects that would plan to come to the Board of Water Resources for funding. We're going to get a big and as comprehensive of a list as we can. The other state funding agencies will do the same, and then those will be what is fed to the Water Development Coordinating Council to prepare their grand prioritization list. And that's what will be called the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan, that's due March of 2026. Water Resources will need to submit our report with those projects. We'll need to submit our status of funds by September of this year. And then the prioritization process for Water Development Coordinating Council will need to be completed by July of 2026. And then start implementing those funding priorities. So the bill was signed by the governor yesterday, I believe. And so it's official. It takes effect on May 1st. So that's kind of a summary of 280.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I would also add that even though the law doesn't go into effect until May 1st, we are feeling lots of pressure with the timelines. We, as Joel mentioned, the Water Development Coordinating Council has already met, and we've coming up, we're starting to meet every 2 weeks with a smaller group on this kind of internal funds, or not internal, but the existing funds study that's due by October. Joel and I and Shalane have been talking about a project manager within our office for the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan. That assignment hasn't been made, but we think we have a good direction there. And so we are trying to hit the ground running as much as possible. And to Joel's point, there's a lot of efforts we need to do from a communication standpoint. And that's something that we need to start working on quickly as well. And then engaging obviously with the board and how the board, envisions this as well. And I would offer, if any of you, I know you're all busy, but have time or interest or want to participate in any of the work groups, please let me know or Joel know. We've also been in discussions with the Utah Water Task Force, and there's a good number of people who are interested in participate as part of the work group for the fee study. Even though that one's a little longer out, there's a lot of interest and I would say concerns about what that might end up with. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, thanks, Joel. And always happy if anything comes up where you're like, oh, I heard about this bill and you have any more questions, please let us know. Or if you visit the bill tracker and you have any questions that come up, we're happy to always chat and answer questions to the best of our ability. The one last item that I wanted to mention, so it doesn't get maybe lost because we all have a lot on our plates. At the last board meeting, we discussed a review of board rules to enhance the water conservation element. And I was trying to think through what is the best way to do that. And I'm wondering if the board would find it helpful if our staff takes a look at it and comes up with our potential recommendations for the conservation element, additional conservation elements that could be added, or if there's board members who are interested in engaging in that with us. I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to keep that ball moving forward. If you have any feedback for us, we'd be happy to take it.
I think, well, I mean, you all have a lot on your plate already, but I do think that, Candace, you and your team, if you can take the lead on at least, I mean, if not making an actual proposal, at least starting to kind of frame things up. And then I think, you've made the offer to us as we want to be engaged, or I shouldn't say want to be engaged, as we have the capacity to be engaged. We can reach out to you with our own ideas or review of what you're doing. Potentially, maybe Mike and I could have a little meeting with you all to, just to keep things on track, I guess. That I would propose that. But, I feel like every single board member has good ideas here. And so we want to make sure that we get everyone's feedback. Just figuring out a
and
process.
on that note,
Yeah.
I meant to put that on your director's report for the briefing and forgot to. I did have a question if anyone had had the opportunity since the last meeting to review those guidelines. Blaine's nodding. Yes. Kyle says yes. Did you send me comments? Okay.
Good.
Okay, I will check my email. No, I will absolutely. Yes, I think you did. That's right. Because I did think about that on my way down here, actually. I thought, oh, I never followed up with the board. And I thought it would be good if there were other things, maybe I'll send it out again and a reminder that maybe if you've got time in the next 2 weeks to review it and get me any comments, suggested changes that you might have. And then we could come up with some staff recommendations for the conservation part of it, consulting with our conservation section, and possibly bring that to you, any potential changes for your consideration, send them out before the next meeting so you have a chance to review them and then possibly discuss it in the May meeting. That work?
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
That's all we have for you. Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and adjourn if there aren't any other items. Are there any other items, questions?
They change the lighting so these don't stare into your eyes. It's
Do
killing
you want
me.
to borrow my sunglasses?
No kidding. I don't know,
a good
but
request.
if they could switch the lighting, that would be much appreciated.
That's a good request. Well, we should maybe look into that in a little bit of a
It
break.
might also be noted that Brian did join us a few minutes ago, so
Great, yeah.
Brian has been part of this meeting.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Blaine. Welcome, Brian. We're glad you made it. And I will just note that in the next meeting with Brian's participation happening remotely, we'll go ahead and do roll call votes.
I apologize for joining remotely, by the way. Thank you so much for accommodating. And the presentation at the Utah Foundation went quite well. So sorry about not being there in person.
Thanks for doing all you do. We appreciate it. All right.
I would just like to make the same comment on with Randy regarding the lights. I made the comment to Mike when we sat down here. I said, I feel like we're in a funeral because they show the lights on the casket, at a funeral. But anyway.
And this is certainly not a funeral. All right, well, let's go ahead and look for that final motion so we can try to see if we can figure out these lights.
Move to adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and we adjourn. And let's go ahead and start at 3:05. So we'll take an additional 5 minutes and we'll start just a bit late, but we will start in 10 minutes at 3:05.